She was just 21 when she sold her mother's only land to fund the dreams of the man she loved. Everyone warned her, don't trade your roots for romance. But Folklore believed love meant sacrifice. And Cunnel, he promised everything, a future, a family, forever, until he vanished. No calls, no closure, just silence. Years later, under the hot sun of Lagos, he spotted a woman sleeping near a gutter, her Ankara dress torn, her hands still stained with thread. It was Folklore, the same girl who once gave him the world, now forgotten by it. What happened in those missing years? And why did she rise higher after falling that far? The full story will break your heart, then rebuild it. In the old, cracked compound the heart abode on, Folklore stood barefoot, gripping a folded land document like her life depended on it. Her late father had left her this one thing, a single plot of land tucked near Yana Church. Every neighbor told her, guard it like gold. But Folklore had something else in mind, love. The boy she loved, Depo, had dreams bigger than the sky. And when he cried to her that his visa to Canada had been denied again because of funds, Folklore didn't blink. I'll sell it, she whispered, heart pounding. Not because she was foolish, but because she believed in him more than herself. Folklore watched the bulldozer tear into land her father once called our future. She had sold it for half its worth to beat the visa deadline. Her aunt had screamed at her, "Your papa go weep in that grave." But Depo had held her hand, kissing her forehead. "I swear, I'll make this worth it." That night, under generator hums and Lagos heat, they celebrated with suya and fanta. She laughed through tears, dreaming of his future in Canada and theirs. What she didn't know was that with every mile Depo's plane flew away, the silence he would return was growing even faster. Weeks passed, then months. Folklore waited like clockwork. She'd rush to the cyber cafe in Makola, refreshing her inbox, praying for a ping from Depo. His WhatsApp last seen froze 2 months after he landed. She wrote long messages, begging, "Are you okay? Just say something." But silence became her new companion. Her friends whispered, "Babe, he don't forget you, oh." But Folklore defended him, even as her room rent expired and her tailoring apprentice job could barely feed her. Her love turned into a quiet kind of hunger, an ache she couldn't share. One morning, after another landlord warning, Folklore sat outside her shop, hands shaking, heart tired. The land was gone. The boy was gone. And the dream? Dust. But still, she hoped. She'd save pictures of them. Beaming at Bodija Umla joint, walking under Lego streetlights, laughing. Her neighbor's voice snapped her back. "You still dey think same go come back?" She forced a smile, but deep inside, her heart whispered, "He will." She had sacrificed everything for love. All she asked from life now was a sign that it wasn't in vain. 2020 came like a thief. The pandemic hit, and with it, her small sewing business crumbled. Events were canceled, customers vanished, and Folklore's last client owed her 5,000 Nigerian nairas for 2 wrappers she would never collect. Her landlord gave her one final warning, and by December, she was out, sleeping in an uncompleted building near Oju with 2 wrappers and a sewing machine wrapped in nylon. Her body was tired, but her soul still waiting. Depo's last voice note still played in her head. "We'll build something great, me and you." But now, the only thing she built was silence. The street is a wicked place, especially to women who once had dreams. Folklore begged at car windows by Oju Junction. Some men offered money with conditions. Others spat when she didn't accept. She washed plates at buka stalls for leftover rice, bathed behind market stalls with rainwater, and avoided area boys at night. But each day, she wrote a line in her notebook. "Depo will come back. I just have to survive." The same street that mocked her once had watched her give everything. Now, it only offered noise, smoke, and forgetting. Depo stepped out of the airport 5 years later. Clean haircut, suitcase in hand, passport stamped with promise. Lagos had changed, but so had he. He thought of her, Folklore, the woman who once sacrificed everything. She must be living large now, he smiled. In his hand was a gold necklace he bought in Toronto to repay what she gave me. He searched Facebook. No posts. Instagram? No profile. Maybe she moved on, he told himself. But something inside him whispered, you owe her more than gold. And so he hired a taxi straight to Ibadan. In Ibadan, Depo visited her old tailoring shop in Bodija. Gone. The kiosk was now a small betting center. The neighbors barely remembered her. She left like 3 years ago. Hard life finished that girl, one said, shaking his head. Depo's heart sank. He moved from junction to junction, asking Okada riders, vendors, even a pastor in Makola. But her name was just a whisper now. No phone, no address, no trail. That night, Depo couldn't sleep. The woman who once gave him everything had vanished into a city that never remembers a kind. Depo wandered to Dugby, hoping someone might recognize her. As he stood near a roasted corn cellar, he saw a woman, thin, dusty, limping slightly. Her back was to him, but something about her walk felt familiar. She bent to pick an empty bottle, dropping it into a sack slung over her shoulder. Depo's heart skipped. Could it be? He called out softly, Folklore? The woman paused, turned halfway, then vanished into the crowd. He chased her through the market, pushing past trays and umbrellas. But she was gone, like a shadow swallowed by the noise of Abaddon's heart. Later that evening, tired and unsure, Depo entered a buka near Makola roundabout. As he ate jollof slowly, the owner, Mama Risi, noticed the silence. Oga, na heartbreak? She joked. Depo chuckled and showed her Folklore's old picture. Mama Risi's smile disappeared. This girl, she day come here before. Quiet, neat, but life beat him, Taya. She pointed to the back alley. Sometimes she goes sleep near my drum. I day give him soup when I fit. Depo's spoon dropped. She had been so close, so broken, and he was 5 years too late. That same night, under the bridge at Sengo, Folklore sat with a torn sweater over her shoulders, scribbling on a piece of carton with charcoal. I am not forgotten. She whispered it like a prayer. Rain threatened the night sky, and she used a nylon bag to cover her sewing machine. She hadn't touched it in months, but she still cleaned it, like hope waiting to be needed. A boy beside her asked, Auntie, you sabi sew? She nodded. Nah, me sew my mama burial gown. But no one knew that the same hands that stitched beauty now begged for bread. The next morning, with his heart pounding, Depo returned to Sengo. He walked slowly along the bridge edge, asking one Danfo conductor after another. Then he saw her, barefoot, holding a plastic bottle of water, sitting beside a sewing machine like it was her only friend. Time stopped. He whispered, Folklore? Her head turned slowly. Their eyes locked. She squinted, not sure if it was real or just another cruel dream. Depo. Her voice cracked. He knelt, tears falling. The girl who gave him everything was right there and broken, but not beyond repair. Folklore stared at Depo, tears welling up behind tired, sunken eyes. Her lips quivered, but she looked away first, ashamed. Why are you here? She whispered. He sat beside her, ignoring the curious glances. To find you, to say I'm sorry. She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping. 5 years. I slept with hunger. I begged with the same voice I once used to pray for you. Depo reached for her hand, but she flinched. Don't touch me with those hands until they rebuilt what they destroyed. His silence screamed guilt as the city moved on around them. He offered her food. She refused. I've survived without your pity, she said, wiping her nose with her sleeve. He nodded slowly and placed the food down anyway. Not pity, regret. She stared at the bread and water like they were sacred. Her fingers trembled as she picked them up, biting slowly, cautiously, as if eating from his hands meant betraying her pride. Depo watched quietly. The woman who once fed his dreams now chewed shame in silence. But in that small act, something shifted. Pain had a seat, but hope was inching toward the table again. As she ate, her fingers brushed the machine beside her. I remember the day I sold Papa's land. You were sick. We needed money. I stitched clothes all night just to afford your meds. Her voice shook. And you left. No goodbye. No explanation. Depo clenched his fists. I got into trouble. Debt. I was ashamed. She looked at him, eyes dim. But I was your home, Depo. You didn't even knock before you ran. The old sewing machine groaned in the breeze beside her, like it too remembered every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every silent tear. Depo stood. Come with me. Let me help you stand again. Folklore hesitated, eyes narrowing. Stand on what? Dreams. He knelt again. No, on truth, on what we lost, but can still rebuild. She looked around, the noise, the cold, the humiliation, and then at him. I'm not the same girl, Depo. He nodded. Good, because I'm not the same boy. Slowly, he picked up a machine and began to walk. She didn't move at first. Then, like breath returned to tired lungs, she followed, one step at a time, into the unknown, but towards something more than memory. Depo led her to the very street where they first dreamt, where their love began beside the Accra woman's stall and the noisy Danfo horns. This place hasn't changed, she murmured. But we have, Depo replied. He laid her sewing machine on a wooden bench in front of an empty shop. It's yours. I rented this place for you. She froze. Why? He exhaled deeply. Because you once gave up everything for me. Now, I'll give every day of my life to rebuild yours. For the first time in years, her heart stirred, not with love, but with fragile trust, aching to be born again. Folklore stepped inside the shop. Dust danced in the sunlight, streaming through broken louvers. It was empty, but it held a strange peace, like a blank canvas waiting for her story. She touched the walls, then sat before the machine. Depo watched from the door, his eyes never leaving her. She began threading the needle, slowly, like learning to walk again. Each pull, each spin of the wheel, rewrote pain into purpose. And as she pressed the pedal for the first time in years, the sound wasn't noise. It was music, the song of resilience, echoing to the heart of a woman reborn. News spread. The girl who vanished had returned, sewing again, selling again. Women came with wrappers, men with igbatas, even schoolgirls needing quick fixes. They came not just for stitches, but for her smile, once buried under layers of suffering. She worked quietly, never saying much. But her hands told stories of loss, of survival, of fierce hope. Depo came daily, helping sweep, fetch water, and sometimes to sit beside her, silently mending what was once broken. And Folklore? She didn't forgive yet. But every laugh that escaped her lips made forgiveness feel closer. One evening, rain fell, heavy and wild. Water leaked from the shop roof, soaking fabric. Folklore tried to salvage her work, but Depo rushed in, using his body to shield her machine. He got drenched, shivering, but didn't move. "You're still protecting me?" she asked, startled. "Always," he said simply. She looked at the machine, at the wet floor, at him, soaked, shivering, and still standing. And suddenly, the flood in her eyes wasn't rain. It was everything she held back. Forgiveness didn't come as a word. It came as a sigh, as she wrapped the shawl around him and whispered, "Thank you." Folklore sat beneath the flickering bulb of her shop, hands working late into the night. This time, the dress she was sewing wasn't for a customer. It was for herself. A soft pink iro and buba, simple, modest, and beautiful. As her hands moved, Depo watched quietly, holding warm akra and pap. "You're finally sewing for yourself?" he asked. She nodded, not looking up. "I need to remember who I was before everything." There was silence between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of hope. Sometimes healing isn't loud. It's a quiet needle-stitching dreams back together. The next morning, the past walked in. A tall woman in gold lace and loud perfume stepped into the shop. It was Nkechi, Depo's former fiancée. "So this is the rat hole you chose over me?" she sneered. Folake froze. Depo stood in her path. "Leave," he said firmly. "You left me when I had nothing." She stayed. Nkechi laughed coldly. "And now you want to be poor together?" But her words held no power anymore. The shop wasn't just four walls. It was a temple of scars, stitched with grace. And Folake? She didn't flinch. She simply turned back to her sewing. A week later, the local church was organizing a wedding for two orphan teens who had nothing. Folake heard of it and offered to sew the bride's gown for free. Depo watched her work tirelessly, pouring every stitch with care. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Because once someone dreamed for me. Now I want to do the same for someone else." The bride wept when she saw the gown. Folake wept too, but silently, not for the pain behind her, but for the peace ahead. In her small shop, she found purpose again. One dress, one life, one dream at a time. Folake opened a small notebook where she now scribbled every new dream. By second sewing machine, it read, "Train girls from the shelter." Depo peeked over his shoulder and smiled. "What's this?" "My vision board," she replied. "My new inheritance." The woman who once walked barefoot through heartbreak now walked with vision. Wearing clothes she stitched with dignity. Legos still roared outside, chaotic and restless. But inside that shop, there was calm, there was order, there was hope. And this time it wasn't borrowed. It was hers, earned, built, and stitched with love. It was a busy Saturday morning at Balogun Market. Folake had come to buy lace in bulk. She bargained like a pro, her voice sharp, her eyes focused. Just as she finalized the deal, a woman tapped her shoulder. "Auntie, aren't you the tailor who gave the orphan girl her wedding gown?" It echoed. "Tailor of the year." Another vendor joked. Before she knew it, two more people gathered. Her story had spread, quietly like good fire. In a city of millions, her kindness had found a voice. And this time, people weren't looking down on her. They were looking up. Days later, a small local TV station reached out. They had heard of the woman who stitched broken dreams. Folake almost declined, but Depo urged her, "Let the world know who you are now." Nervous but determined, she sat before the camera in her tiny shop. "I lost everything," she began, "but love helped me rebuild, thread by thread." Her words cracked, but she held her chin up. The interviewer asked, "If you could say one thing to the man who left you, what would it be?" Folake paused. "Thank you. You helped me find myself." Silence, then tears. One morning, Folake received a brown envelope with no name. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was from Cunnel. Her heart paused. In it he wrote, "I saw your interview. I'm sorry. I was weak. I took your sacrifice and ran. I've watched your journey and I weep. You deserve the world. Thank you for loving me when I was nothing." There was no request, no manipulation, just apology. Folake folded the letter, held it to her chest, and smiled faintly. Not all closure comes in confrontations. Some come in soft paper, and the decision not to reopen old wounds. That evening, Depo invited Folake to the beach. No noise, no crowd, just waves and sunset. "I have nothing fancy," he said, pulling out a small piece of encre folded like a rose. "But will you build the rest of your life with me?" Folake laughed through tears. "This is the most honest proposal I've ever seen." She took the cloth flower and whispered yes. No ring, no Instagram post. Just love, raw, healing, and deeply Nigerian. Beneath the orange sky, they sat with sand between their toes and plans between their hearts. And Lagos? It just kept roaring behind them. Days after the engagement, Folklore returned to her shop only to find an envelope on the door. Inside was a bridal order from a wealthy client who had seen her TV interview. The note read, "I believe in women who rise from fire. Design my wedding." It was her first high-end client. Folklore stood frozen. Her hands trembled as she stared at the fabric sample enclosed. That night, she didn't sleep. She sketched all night, pouring in every ounce of dignity, pain, and grace she had. This wasn't just work. This was her voice, her redemption, stitched in silk. Weeks later, another letter arrived, this time from a fashion academy. Her designs had gone viral online. Someone had posted her sketches. Now she was invited to showcase her pieces at the Lagos Women in Fashion Gala. Folklore cried, alone in her shop, then laughed like a child. The streets she once begged on now whispered her name in praise. Depo lifted her gently in celebration. "This is only the beginning," he whispered. Folklore looked at the calendar. The show date? It fell exactly 3 years after Cunnel abandoned her. Poetic, wasn't it? Under the spotlight at the fashion gala, Folklore stood in the shadows backstage. Models strutted out in her designs, bold, vibrant, Afro-urban masterpieces. The audience gasped, clapped, and rose in ovation. She couldn't believe it. Tears streamed down her cheeks. The host called her name. She walked out, nervous but strong, into flashing lights and loud applause. Standing there, she didn't think of Cunnel or even Depo. She thought of her mother, the woman whose land she sold. "You gave me everything, Mama," she whispered to herself. "Today, I return it in my name." The next morning, headlines read, "Tailor from the streets redefines Lagos fashion." Her face was on the cover, no longer hidden behind shame or survival. In her shop, neighborhood kids now wave at her. "Auntie Folklore, teach me how to sew." Parents pointed her out with pride. She had become a living story, proof that pain doesn't end purpose, it refines it. Depo, standing beside her, beamed with pride. "You didn't just rise," he said. "You flew." She folded the paper gently and whispered, "It was never just my dream. It was Mama's. And now, it's for every girl who's been forgotten." It was at a youth empowerment event where Folklore was speaking about rising from hardship. As she told her story, her voice steady but soft, someone in the crowd caught her eye. A man, unshaved, worn out, eyes sunken. She blinked. No, it couldn't be. But it was Cunnel. He stood silently, staring. Gone was the confident boy she once loved. What was left was a man who had tasted the street and choked on it. After the talk, he approached slowly. "Folklore, I didn't know how to face you." She nodded. "Neither did I know I'd ever forgive you." They spoke by a corner of the community center. No audience, no stage, just truth. Cunnel confessed everything. The debt, the lies, the guilt that haunted him. "I saw you that day on the streets, but I ran." Folklore listened. She didn't cry. "Not anymore. You ran when I needed you, but your absence built me." She held his hand briefly, then let it go. "You were the wound, but not the reason I healed." Cunnel's lips trembled. He had hoped for a second chance. But this wasn't about romance. It was about release. The following week, Folklore stood at the gates of the Lagos International Fashion Academy. She had been invited not as a student, but as a visiting mentor. She adjusted her geli, held her sketch pad, and walked through those glass doors with confidence. Inside, dozens of young women stood ready, waiting to learn from her. She began her class with one sentence: "Don't let betrayal bury your dream. Let it fertilize it." They clapped, but more than that, they listened. She was no longer just a tailor. She was a symbol. That night, Depo took Folklore back to where their journey had begun, her tiny shop. Only now, it had expanded into a boutique. Inside, candles flickered and soft high-life music played. "I gave you a cloth flower the first time," he smiled, holding out a real ring now. "But this is for the woman who stitched her own future." Folklore smiled, not because of the ring, but because she knew her heart was safe. As she said yes again, she whispered, "This time, I'm not giving up any inheritance. I'm building one." Folklore returned to her late mother's village, this time not with shame, but with purpose. She walked past the same elders who once whispered about her, past the same compound where her mother prayed each night. But now, her hands held keys. She had bought back her mother's land. And more, she was building a vocational center for girls. "Mama gave me land. I turned it into legacy." As she spoke to the village women, one elder clutched her chest and said, "Your mother lives in your fire." Folklore smiled. That was the truest inheritance. Cunnel returned too, but to the same streets where he once abandoned Folklore. He started volunteering at the rehabilitation center Dapo co-founded. Every Friday, he told recovering addicts his story, not as a hero, but as a warning. He often ended with, "The woman I failed became the woman who saved me." The center gave him food, purpose, and slowly, peace. One day, he received a package. Inside was a handmade jacket, stitched by Folklore herself. A note read, "Some stories don't end in love, but they can still end in light." Folklore and Dapo's wedding wasn't a luxurious event in Lekki. It was a purpose-driven celebration in a community center, filled with former street women, apprentices, and tailors. She wore a gown stitched by her own hands, with pieces of her mother's old wrapper sewn into the lining. As they exchanged vows, rain began to fall gently on the rooftop, blessing the union, as if the heavens themselves approved. "This isn't just love," Dapo whispered. "This is legacy." She nodded. Together, they weren't just building a home. They were building hope. Months later, Folklore sat in a Lego cinema as the lights dimmed. On screen, a documentary titled Threads of Fire, the Folklore story. Her journey, once hidden in pain, was now inspiring thousands. As the credits rolled, she stood on stage and told the crowd, "Your pain is not your prison. It's your path." Viewers rose to their feet. Some cried, some clapped, but all were changed. Her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to every girl who gave too much and still had enough left to rise. Sometimes, the people we lose ourselves for are the very ones who teach us how to find our worth. Folklore gave everything: love, land, dignity. But what she didn't know was that her greatest loss would awaken her greatest strength. If you've ever given too much and been left with nothing, this story is a reminder. You can rise, you can rebuild, and your pain can become someone else's miracle. Don't just let this story end here. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to watch more powerful real-life stories like this. Share this video with someone going through a silent struggle. Subscribe now to Echoes of Africa Stories, where every story has a soul and every soul deserves to be heard. Because your story isn't over yet.